Hey friends, and welcome to my Dream Log Cabin podcast. I'm so excited today to be presenting you with our first video podcast. This is going to be great. Thank you to Jon and Cathy for opening up their beautiful log home, I should say, right? Not a log cabin. And I'm so excited to get started and introduce you to these beautiful people and their beautiful homes. So let's do this. Wonderful. Thank you both again so much for letting us in your home and for doing this. I'm just so grateful. I mean that from the bottom of my heart. I already told you I'm a log cabin nut, so thank you so much. I wanted to hear your story, kind of like start from the beginning. Tell us who loved log cabins and how did this come to be, and your story of how you ended up in this home. Is this your first log cabin home?
Yes.
Okay. So tell us how you got here.
Well, it probably goes back to my childhood in that I was a military brat. My dad, my first 8 years of my life, I was in El Paso, Texas. The desert, dry, not too many trees. Every tree had to be planted that you got there. And I was only 8 years old when we arrived in Alaska, in Anchorage, Alaska, Fort Richardson exactly. And I spent 3.5 years there, we did, and I grew to love mountains with trees, forested trees. I played in the forest, water everywhere, rivers, lakes, the ocean not that far away, animals, wild animals walking up and down the street, moose and deer and you name it. I really loved the outdoors from there. And of course, from there we went to Georgia and then back to El Paso and away from. But I remember as a child, about 11 years old, as we came back, going down the highway, thinking to myself, when I grow up, I'm going to live in the woods with green around me and mountains and a little stream and maybe even just a little log house like I used to see in Alaska. But the only thing I knew was little tiny log cabins from there. There was no such thing at the time that I saw as a big, beautiful log home. Didn't think about it for a long time till I was an adult going from East Texas. At the time I was living in East Texas, Dallas, Fort Worth, took a trip to the piney woods of East Texas. And on the way home, saw a log building, what looked like a log home along the highway. And I'm going, wow, in East Texas, there's a log home. What it really was a model home. And we stopped and we went in and I bought a booklet of kits with little pictures. It was like a folder and it had a dozen different kits in there, and I dreamt about that since my early 20s.
I love how log cabin stories always start with this, just some sort of attraction that happens early on and somebody just thinks about it, and the dream is such an important part. And that's one of the reasons why I love this podcast, because I think there's so many other people who think, oh, it's just me and it's just my dream, but it's not. And I want them to hear the story. Like, you dreamt about it for how many years before it became true for you?
Well, that was my mid-20s probably that I bought that first packet of designs and thought about it. And then from there I was in Dallas-Fort Worth area for a lot of years teaching, and then I moved to Turkey and had that packet with me the whole time, and eventually met my husband there and talked to him about it, and he thought it was a good idea.
I worked in the Forest Service for 4 summers, making my way through college, and was out in the woods and loved the outdoors. And especially after living in Turkey 3 times, concrete apartment buildings, there was no way I was going to live in a town. And so when she brought up the idea of a log home, I fell right in with it. That fit with what I wanted perfectly.
Wonderful. I love how the stars aligned. That's so awesome. What point? So you were saying earlier, I think before we started recording, about how you used to travel, and you folks were coming out here to meet up with John's parents, this general area?
Yes, when we got married in '92, we first came to Idaho
That summer.
that summer. And he hadn't been here because his parents used to live in Walla Walla, Washington. And they had just moved to Idaho, not far from us. And so this was our first experience, was this area. And several years later, coming back during the summer, we spent a whole summer in the Grand Teton area. And our families visited us there, and then they all left, and we did a lot of outdoor sorts of things that we love to do. And we had a friend's truck, and we drove up through Idaho, through Stanley, the Bitterroot Valley, up Highway 93 the whole way. And we stopped for the night in a little town called Hamilton, and we fell in love. And it was really beautiful. And we talked to a guy, I don't know if we talked to him that summer or somehow got a hold of him, but it was a real estate agent. And we went back the following summer and looked at a lot of different pieces of property.
Yeah, we spent 2 weeks with him every day going out looking for property. And that whole highway from Hamilton headed up towards Missoula was all model log homes and log home companies. Mm-hmm. And so I had started on a computer trying to design a log home we did find a piece of property about 10 acres, sat right at the foot of some majestic mountains, and ended up we didn't want to leave without buying something, so we bought about 10 or 11 acre piece of property at that point.
The following summer, we ended up back here visiting with his parents for his dad's birthday in July, and they had some neighbors from across the street there visiting, young couple in their 20s, and we were having an outdoor barbecue, and they were telling me about the young man was telling me I think that these two, the wife and John, had gone inside with all the dishes. We'd finished dinner, and the young man was saying, "Oh, well, I know this guy. I hear you like antiques. We know this guy that has a whole house full of antiques." And we said, "Oh," I said, yeah, nice, but we have a lot of antiques and we don't have any place to put them. We don't need any more." And he said, "Well, they're in a log home, a 4,000 square foot log home." And I said, "Oh, we are looking for a log home. We are." And then he said, "On 20 acres. And I went, "Really?" He was reeling me in.
It wasn't even his house.
It wasn't his house.
Somebody that he knew.
And so John came and sat down with us again, and I told him what this young man had just told me, and he said, "Well, it wouldn't hurt to look." So the young man brought us out here, and that was it. We fell in love. We walked in the door, and the first thing we did was to look at that fireplace in front of us, and decided, we just kind of looked at each other thinking, if we want to buy this house, because he was selling it. His wife had just passed away, and he wanted to get it out of it. And we just looked at the fireplace, and that was it. I fell in love because I had been looking for several years through every log home magazine that I could find, and looking at different fireplaces, and some of them were too small with too big of a fire pit there, or different kind of rock. Just I couldn't get the rustic thing that I really wanted, and we just kind of looked at each other and went, "Shh, don't say anything."
And it's river rock from the property. When they dug out the foundation, they built it, and I mean, it was just, that was the first thing.
Then we went around the corner and saw the stained glass window, and we fell in love with that. And then I walked further down the hallway, and there was this bathroom that was very feminine. I thought, this is weird. I looked in, and it was my favorite color, purple. All done in like a little garden setting with a little, gazebo, and it was so unusual. And I thought, this house was meant for me.
So we still had the property in Montana, and we were paying on and paying rent, utilities in Turkey. Said, we can't afford to do this, but we can't afford not to. Mm-hmm. We weren't looking for a piece of property with a house on it, and it just kind of fell into our lap. And so we were going back to Montana to look at the property and maybe put in a well the first summer or a septic tank the next summer. And over 4 years, then come back and have the house built. And if we'd done that, we would almost have been burnt out because it had the massive fires. Oh, wow. So we made an offer on the house. Went to Montana, found out he declined the offer. We made an alternate offer, and on the way we got back and found out he accepted the second offer. But we asked for several pieces of the antique furniture to go along with it. And fortunately, within a year, we sold the property in Oregon, and that made a difference. And we sold the property that we just purchased in Montana, yeah. Wow. So that we were property rich and dollar poor for a while, but it all worked out.
Isn't that interesting? I just think it's so interesting how when, like you were saying, it was like it was meant for me. That's what I love most about these stories, is it almost seems like God has his hand in these adventures, as I call them, and we don't always know where it's going to lead, but to keep having faith and just keep moving forward. And like you said, we didn't know how we were going to afford it, but this happened and this happened and this happened, and then all of a sudden it was, here you are.
Yeah. We when we went back to see our property in Montana, we stayed the night. We had a little RV, and we stayed the night on it, and it just seemed so much smaller than we thought at first. And there were a couple of more houses built up around it. And but the mountains were so beautiful, and I really do love rugged mountains. Our mountains are not all that rugged, but they're beautiful. And we got back and we thought, we're 3 hours closer to our family. John's parents were living right here.
20 minutes away.
His kids were less, instead of 7 hours away, they were only less than 4 hours away. And so it just was the perfect place. And this also gave us a place to stay during the summers until we moved back permanently, instead of living out of everybody else's house in our suitcases.
There's always a moment when I'm in these experiences where I get chills listening to someone's story, where it's almost like it was meant to be, and look how much better it turned out. And it just happened while you were telling me that. I'm like, ooh, okay, I got those tingles on. So tell me about what the house looked like when you bought it.
Well, we had in our minds a modern built house, because we had been seeing them in Montana and had gone to a number of places. So we were imagining something much more elaborate than what this was. And we just fell in love with it because it had the property and the price was unbelievable at the time. And I think that's what we got, a lot more for our dollar here than we would have ever gotten over there in Montana, where we were planning to build. And this place it looked like a log cabin, but just longer.
It wasn't very well taken care of. What I call the Pink Panther insulation was sticking out inside and outside between the logs. You could see light between logs. There was no chinking. My parents would come in the summer before we got back to open the house up and sweep up all the dead bugs and spiders and everything from under all the windows. And there was a lot of it. So it was livable, but it needed a lot of work. The owner was not a carpenter, and so when he did the finishing work inside, he left the edges of sheetrock exposed, so you would see bits of sheetrock on the floor. In different places.
All the electrical outlets, the plugs, they were all sticking out from the logs. They were just metal boxes out.
And I spent one part of one summer chiseling into the log and insetting all all the boxes. And we, over the years, 24, 25 years, have remodeled every room in one way or another.
We went from finishing off the, really scrubbing down the outside and restaining because it was really weathered badly. And then he chinked it. Jon chinked it. And then we worked on the inside doing similar things. It was dark red log, Lincoln log color everywhere. It was dark. And I asked, we had a specialist that lived, there was a little log home place up near us, not too far, and we asked the guy to come out, and we said, what are the possibilities of having this log cleaned and changed colors, sandblasted? He said, well, yeah, we could sandblast it. It would be a pretty big work, and it would make a real big mess and be very expensive. And we went, oh, okay. So the next summer, I asked Jon, well, what do you think it would be like to try to sand it ourselves, sand the logs ourselves? So he borrowed a sander from his dad, and he went into his bathroom, because unusual house. It has his and her bathrooms right next to, instead of a guest and a master suite. It's unusual that way. But he went into his bathroom and he sanded a little bit, and he came out and he said, well, I have good news and I have bad news. And he said
the good news is, the good news is it sands off pretty easily.
And
the bad news and the bad news is you're going to want me to do the whole house. And we did that summer. We had almost no furniture, so we put plastic on, covered up one room, and with hat and goggles and mask, on a ladder, I sanded all the logs in the ceiling and all the logs on the walls. Cathy would come then and vacuum and wet wipe down everything. Then we polyurethaned, and then we chinked. I had to learn how to chink, and I did that on the outside because the outside was a 5-step process. The logs were black from pollen, from smoke, from sun damage. And that first year that we did that, it turned the logs into looking like these logs to begin with. It probably needs another treatment, but it was a 5-step process to do that.
That is not easy. Wow. Do you need a job? Because I think we're hiring for restoration.
Not at my age now.
You're the experienced one now. You can teach all the other guys. Wonderful. And, you kind of toured around and showed us. I love what you did with your ceilings in the kitchen and some of the bathrooms. And kind of tell me about why you did that and how that got.
Well, we did not sand the ceilings, so they're still Lincoln log color throughout most of the house, and it adds a nice dimension because the logs are lighter and they still have the red grain from the original stain, and it adds a nice texture to the logs, but it makes it dark to keep these red ceilings the way they are, and I just needed a lighter kitchen and a lighter bathrooms, and so we painted those white. And it has made such a difference.
I bet that, and we were talking about the challenge that would be because the trusses are round and go right up to the ceiling. So, I mean, that's a tiny little area. You got to get your paint in there, but you guys did just a beautiful job. I mean, the whole house is gorgeous. And I bet everywhere you look, you can remember the hard work you put into every inch of it as you walk through it.
We truly can. And all the walls had wallpaper, so that was another step we had to do. And then we had layers of old 1970s wallpaper.
Oh, that's right. This house was built in the 70s. I forgot to mention that. Yeah.
Oh, and that some of it was very dark, and some of the wallpaper in the hallway in our bedroom was the same color as the ceilings. They were red.
Oh, wow.
With tiny little design. So it was very dated. And Jon and I worked on getting the wallpaper off, and then he learned how to texture the walls and then paint them And then he did trim all the way around. He was amazing. And as you'll see in places, not everywhere through the house, where he actually
that wall over there.
sculpted the trim to match the logs. What a job. You know, many trips down to his shop and back to do that. So, but it is, like you say, a labor of love. It really has been. And it's going to be hard as we grow older, knowing, you know, that we eventually are going to have to move away.
Yeah, that does make it. It's a very special place. What do you plan to do still? Do you have any last touches you want to put on it still, or are you guys done?
I keep saying I hope this is the last project. Right now, we had a pole barn put in a couple of years ago, and then the front carport was a new addition to it. Didn't have that, and we're putting up a split rail fence out on the edge of the road. But I'm hoping that we're about finished with the projects. The front doors need to be replaced, the main two big ones, but hopefully we're about finished.
A lot of labor of love,
Yeah.
and it's paid off. I mean, tremendously. So I guess looking back and hearing your story, is there anything you would have done differently? Is there anything you wish would have been different, or do you think it just perfectly worked out the way it was?
Well, inside, I think we did what we could with what we had and with our own knowledge and getting ideas. Outdoors is a whole different story. If we had had the funds, because I was a teacher, he was retired military. We had, when I came here, I had a very big drop in pay to Idaho from where I was, and I did teach for a while, but only part-time. So we had limited funds at the time. We could have used bigger equipment to help us through some of the wood projects outdoors. A tractor.
I only got that, 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah, 5 years
and
ago.
it would have made such a difference. And I couldn't do the stuff outside now that I need the tractor for. And it's not a big tractor, but it's big enough to do most of the stuff I need to do. That would have saved me a lot of work and a lot of time.
And there are a lot of little things like, well, not so little, but we just finally got the outside sunlight basement walls at the bottom finished, getting stone facing on all of them. It's artificial stone facing, but it looks much better. It was all that rough cedar that they had glued on. and when it finally rotted off, it left big splotches of these glue on concrete colored.
And they had some bolts. There were some bolts to use to hold it on. But the back wasn't. The back was all painted red.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
seemed backwards, like somebody hung it up backwards. Yeah. Like the wallpaper in the bathroom
exactly,
upside down.
that story. Anyway, it could have, if we could have had all of that stone put on before we did all the landscaping, that would have made, but it made things harder. Because we had to do things in steps as we had the funds.
We were talking about that it would have been easier if that was done before the landscaping, but ultimately you just did what you could with what you had, and it was what it was. I have 2 questions left, okay? So, what do you love best about your house and about the lifestyle you have here?
Even if it was a stick frame, wood frame house, we love the location because the original owners positioned the house the right way. And we get the sunrise and the moonrise over the mountains and the sunsets. But as far as the log home, we feel extremely secure from earthquakes, winds. We've had 75 to 85, 90 mile an hour wind gusts in the past that has not affected the house whatsoever. That one winter, it was December, we did have a tree fall on the bedroom on the house. It was a pretty good sized fir tree. It punched one hole in the metal roofing, and that was it. And we lost 100 trees that windstorm. And other than that one tree that the top broke and fell on the house, we had no issue with the roofing, the patio in the back, the plastic on top, no problem, nothing with the logs. So we feel really secure. Plus, it's a hunting area. And these are 10-inch logs. and there's no round that's going to come through the logs. I mean, the windows they could, but I find arrows in the backyard occasionally that people have hunted because they do bow hunting a lot. But a stray round from a rifle is not going to come through the logs. So we feel pretty secure with all that.
And it's comfortable in the winter and the summer. In the summer, we rarely have our air conditioning working because it's always cool.
You could open the windows and we get the breezes.
Yeah, you guys have really good facing so that you get that cross breeze perfectly. Yeah. And you're right, log homes do stay warmer in the winter and cooler in the summer. They really do, naturally. That's great. Okay, so last thing, what would you say to other people who might be dreaming of a log home, and maybe they're at the stage where you were at when you got your catalog, thinking, I don't know if it's ever going to happen, but it would be nice if it did.
Keep at it. Keep working at it and keep trying and work with a good, reliable contractor.
Because one of the things that somebody brand new to it won't realize is in this house, because it was an older home, is that the logs had settled. We've got over behind there, we've got logs that tilt at an angle because the house settled. You put any picture on that wall and it's going to look crooked. When you buy a new one, the cabinets have to be put on runners so that as the logs settle, it doesn't, otherwise it'll rip the cabinet right off the wall. We didn't have to worry about that. So when we remodeled the kitchen, we could screw all the cabinets right into the wall and not have to worry about the logs settling. And a lot of people wouldn't even think of that a log home would settle that much, but it will, more so than even a regular house will.
Well, and even our subflooring is not well done. So we often have streams of water, with big spill going from one part of the room to the next. When I sit at my desk in my office, the chair moves back by
If she even touches the thing, she'll roll right back towards my chair. And you can see even the cabinet back here, how the top sits against the wall and the bottom doesn't. It's just the floors are not level.
You get used to non-perfections.
That's so true. I think that's what I was going back to saying, like, people who love log cabins, I think they almost like that character. Like you said, this house had these interesting things that were perfect for you. And that's what makes it beautiful. Well, I just can't thank you both enough for this experience. It's truly a pleasure. And
thank you for letting us share.
Yeah.
We love talking about our log home and our experience.
I'm so glad. Well, I'm glad you guys got to